So 2001 was perhaps the heyday of the independent web. There was a project called Independence Day and was celebrated and developed by artists, filmmakers, musicians, and everyone that wanted to put their content online. And they had a manifesto, and the manifesto said, it's a worldwide project celebrating independent content and design on the web. We took it as an assumption that if you were putting your stuff on the web on your own site. And we met for a week out of the year at this conference, South by Southwest Interactive. You can see all these creators meeting and developing the next generation of formats and protocols. And not only that, websites are new forms of interaction. And this continued for quite some time. And we all assumed that it was sort of our inevitable destiny, that the web was open, the internet was open, everyone had their own identity, to the point where everyone knew each other, not by their names, but we actually knew each other by our URLs, by our domain names, because everyone owned their domain and had control over it. And this was our assumption. But looking back, 2003 might have been the peak of the independent web. Well, you might ask, well, what happened after that? What happened that would be the peak? Well, silos happened. And they first started a lot friendlier than what appears here. The first thing that started happening is the people you saw in those very pictures created these friendly silos that brought together new forms of interactions like tagging, new communities. People could find each other. Of course, a lot of what we do on the web is all about being social, finding each other, finding new people, interacting with people online. And this was a great boon. Other silos like Upcoming did this as well. However, silos continued to evolve, and Twitter popularized simplicity. This is something that really affected each and every one of us. Everyone here probably who has a blog remembers when they first started tweeting, like, why am I using this? And then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm addicted to this. It was simple. It was easy. You didn't have to craft paragraphs of prose in order to do it. You just said something quickly. Look at that simple UI. Of course, that's not what it looks like today, but that's how it started, and that's what we should remember. The next big step that happened is silo platforms launch. With the launch of Facebook platform, it was really clear. It wasn't just about the open web. There were entire ecosystems growing and burgeoning that had nothing to do with the open web, that were proprietary to a silo. Not only that, not only did they want your content and your applications, they wanted your identity. Okay? Some of you may remember an effort called OpenID, which succeeded to some extent, but had lots of problems with its user interaction model, with its user interface, and Facebook killed it. Like, they didn't kill OpenID, but they really got user interaction right with Facebook Connect. They made it easy, they made it simple, they made it, what was the term that Bruce Schneider used? Convenient. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that convenience matters. They made it convenient. Facebook Connect is what people use to sign into various applications and sites today, not OpenID. Okay, this only has gotten worse. This year's Facebook Fake conference, it's really clear how the silos see themselves. At the center, not at as one of the nodes, but at the center of a sphere of influence. And it's not a coincidence that this is a globe here in the background. They literally see themselves as a global sphere of influence, just like any nation state would. So that's where we are today. The silos have taken over. And yet, while some dominated, other silos. Who here had an AOL home site? Anyone? Anyone? Not seeing anyone. Well, in 2008, AOL home sites shut down. And what I really like is this middle quote right here, which says, "What a shambles and a poor show. No one wants to know either what the problem was, why. Fortunately, I saved my web page and transferred it to GeoCities." Of course, we know what happened the very next year. Yahoo shuts down GeoCities. And this has happened over and over and over again, right? Google buys Etherpad and shuts it down, announces to Etherpad users and gives them an invitation to use Google Wave. Of course, within 3 months, that didn't even last a year, Google Wave is shut down. Six Apart buys Pounce and then says, oh, everyone on Pounce, go ahead and move export your data. We'll support it, import it into Vox. Vox was shut down the very next year. So this is not sustainable. The shutdowns have continued, even to last year. One of the most influential sites that we used a lot back in the day, upcoming.org, was shut down by Yahoo. Of course, this has a really interesting twist this year, which is that they somehow contacted the original founder, Andy Bio, sold him the domain name back. He started a Kickstarter, and it might come back as an independent project. There's hope. But with others, there's really no hope. Twitter bought Posterous, shut it down. All the permalinks are dead. Who knows if the archive team actually saved all the content. But that's the world that we're living in. These shutdowns have continued and will continue to continue. And there's a bunch more you can find. Just look for site deaths. You'll find it. But what went wrong in 2003 that led to this path of the silos both dominating and then destroying our content? What went wrong? We were here. We were peak independent web. Everyone had their own domain names. We were blogging and linking back and forth. Everything was going on. What happened in 2003? Well, one thing that happened was the RSS atom wars. This was a huge distraction among all the technologists between, say, 2003 and like 2007 or so at least. We had the arrogance to think that debating protocols, debating was more important than debating interaction with people. We debated formats rather than talking about, well, how do we actually connect friends and family? And we really missed the point here. If you focus on the plumbing, then the people will ignore you, and that's what happened. But we did some other plumbing, like trackback and pingback. What happened to those? Trackback got overrun with spam, a problem that's yet to be solved to this day. If you put up a blog that supports trackback, you get spammed. Well, what about pingback? You look at this user experience, and it's like, OK, there's this pingback from this link, and it's got this ellipsized content. That's not readable at all. It's a horrible user experience, and just goes to show where the focus was among technologists. It was on the plumbing and not on the user experience. And that's really where we fell behind, and the silos took over. Worse than the experience being noisy, if you sit down to try and write a blog post, it takes a lot of concentration. And I love this webcomic illustration, where it's like, on the other hand, the internet has just gotten more and more distracting, right? It's like we are amusing ourselves to the death of our own permalinks. That's basically what's happening. How can anyone compete with that? Well, we tried anyway. In 2008, O'Reilly convened a social web food camp. And Ralph and Blaine, in this picture, actually got Twitter and Jaiku federating. Does anyone remember Jaiku? Oh my goodness. OK, like almost no one. OK, so Jaiku was a service like Twitter that Google bought, subsequently shut down because, of course, they were going to focus on Google Buzz. Right. OK, you've heard this story enough times. But what happened? These guys actually got this working. 2 sites cross-federating in real time. What happened? Well, it was like a brilliant flash of lightning between 2 silos. It looked cool, it was awesome, but then faded. It really didn't last. We kept trying, right? In 2010, there was a Federated Social Web Summit. But it turned out that there was a lot of time spent on discussing what could be possible or spending time on various email lists than what was possible. So it really was more like the frustrated Social Web Summit. But something did come out of this, which is that I realized, like, I don't care about federation. I care about my content. I care about my friends. And this is the aspect that really matters, is the human aspect and the aspect that we can build upon, which is what motivates people to work on the web, to contribute content, to create things. So in 2010, I proposed with the co-founder, Aaron Parecki, how about we do an IndieWeb? Like, why don't we focus on independence again and go back to that? So in 2011, we did the very first IndieWeb camp. We co-founded it with Amber Case and Crystal Beasley, and the 4 of us organized this in Portland. Would anyone come? Would anyone show up? We said, OK, we're going to set a bar. You have to be a creator. You have to be someone that actually creates on the web with your own website. We're not going to just be talking on email. And people did show up, and we built stuff. Everyone here in this picture improved their own personal website. Some even launched their personal website, which they never had before. And it was an amazing success. So this is only a small handful of folks, though. How do we stay productive afterwards? One thing, no email lists. You're not going to email your way into building a website. So we said, we don't need it. We're not going to use email. We're going to use the web itself to build the web that we want. So this is what mailing list archives look like. It's basically a bunch of metadata. And while there are other parties that may be very interested in that metadata, this is not something we really care about to look at. Right? This is not even like the message is down below, that little down below at the bottom. Most of this is metadata. It's not really usable. On the other hand, we've been using IRC. And this is an IRC archive. An entire conversation is in a screenful. Much more efficient for quickly back and forth. If you have something longer to say, you put it on the web. You blog it on your own site. And we made that clear. We have learned from the silos. So while the silos have been innovating, we didn't just sit still. We said, you know what? User experience matters. People matter. Yes, design matters. And so this, what you're looking at, is the reply on its own site, on Aaron Parecki's page, where he's replying to Lawrence's post above. So he showed the context, wrote his reply. His reply has a permalink on aaronparecki.com. That's pretty awesome. The cool thing is, it also shows up on Lawrence's site, because he's using a protocol called web mention to send it over to Lawrence's site. Lawrence is reading it and displaying it just like a comment. You can't tell the difference between which comments came from the IndieWeb and which comments came from a comment form. And that's the way it should be. It should all look consistent. It should all be usable. It should all be readable. But we continued. You look at how pingback display works. It's ugly, right? Look at the way that web mention and microformats 2, really simple addition to HTML, have made this work on Amber's site. It's a comment thread. They look like comments. Every single comment here comes from its own site, not from a comment form. Right? But you can't tell a difference, and that's the beauty. That's how seamless it has to be. We didn't stop at comments. We've actually made events work across sites as well. This is an event that's posted on Ben Werdmuller's site using his own software. By the way, all these people are building their own software. Right, all those RSVPs are coming from different sites. So that's the event, and here's an Indie RSVP. We've got federated events working in real time today, and that's pretty awesome. However, do we actually have a chance? Like a handful of creators building these tools, how do we actually compete against organizations that have thousands of developers, like improving their design? Do we have a chance? How can we compete with the mega silos, right? There's a chance. This is what we've noticed happen in the last year. We may have hit peak silo user experience. OK, for those of you, what's going on here? These look like the same image, but that's actually, I have to look carefully. That's Facebook on the left, and that's the new Twitter on the right. I know you have to look carefully, but it really is two different websites. But they're at the point where they're just copying each other. So we can do better than that. And we figured out, OK, we're not going to get everyone to adopt the IndieWeb instantly. This has to come in generations. And we figured out how to do this. Obviously, like many technical movements, it starts with development leaders. And we're OK with that. We're self-dog-fooding it. If you can't make something work for yourself, then why should anyone else bother? We've realized, though, there are lots of tech-savvy journalists and bloggers that are just itching to regain and re-own their own identity. And we're working with them as well. That's generation 2. From there on, we're going to get to personal domains and people using social networks. It's going to happen. So this is a post by Dan Gilmore on Slate. Actually, it's not a post. It's a copy. It's a syndication of his post on his own site. So he has taken back his identity, his content. And why? Because of the experience. Because on his site, he can pull in interactions from Twitter, independent websites, and Google+ all in one place. He now has an experience on his site that's better than any silo, any other place that takes his experience. And that's awesome. Here's where we are today. The IndieWeb wants you. We want you to own your data. We want you to own your permalinks. We want you to own your identity online. This is what we want. We want you to own all these things for yourself. But I can only show you the door. Talk to us. Go to indiewebcamp.com/discuss. There's a web form. You can discuss with us. Read and edit our wiki, indiewebcamp.com. Follow @IndieWebCamp on Twitter. Yes, we still use the silos as a distribution mechanism. Right? We will use the tools of our competitors, of our enemies, for their own causes. We're not above that. And finally, in 3 weeks here in New York City, you want to come work on this? Come work on this with us. Join us at IndieWeb Camp 2014 at the New York Times, June 28th and 29th, and help us build the next generation of the independent web. Thank you.